Hello, my name is Andy Weinstein. I am founder and CEO of GODOT, and I am also host of What Are You Waiting For? A podcast by GODOT. Today, we are joined by Jayden, who we interviewed last week. This week is going to be a bit different. We're going to flip the tables. Jayden's going to interview me, and I'm putting myself into the guest seat. So without further ado, let's do a quick introduction of Jayden and then start the interview. Jayden?
Hey, nice to see everyone. I'm Jayden Wan, coming freshman at Stanford University and an intern here with Godot, here on What Are You Waiting For? I'm excited for this because, like Andy said, we get to put him in the spotlight, and it means that I have to do a bit less talking and we can really hone in on, I think, the start of the show. Andy, maybe to start us off, I'm wondering if you could give us a quick intro to just your background in general. What led you to start Godot? Let's hear.
Yeah, thank you, Jayden. So, my background is I'm a third generation Pepsi bottler who accidentally became a waste to value entrepreneur. And I say waste to value not because energy is the only output, it's just because at the end of the day, we're turning waste streams back into their original kind of ingredients and then repurposing them to ingredients of usefulness. I got into this just because I was trying to help other Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, and Coors distributors across the country make their trucks more efficient by selling other things. Fundamentally, when you're in the beverage business, it's easy to address the share of wallet that's associated with beverage. But because I had this unique background of diversifying my own family business into food service and janitorial, I realized that I could help others in that system address those janitorial needs. And what that really did was give me this huge opportunity to see in everybody's back rooms and understand where these giant piles of waste were and what outputs I could generate with those waste to kind of satisfy the needs of the beverage industry. So for me, what really started this was a series of accidents that led me to a place of understanding basically how the global supply chain works and how I can connect it in much more efficient ways so that we are no longer shipping waste across the world, but we are turning local waste into local value.
Wow. Hey, I like that. Even, I think one thing that I was curious about going into, really just learning about Godot was this idea of, taking waste and converting it to these high demand products like hydrogen, CO2. I'm curious, you said you started off approaching, say, this system of the supply chain as well as, your own family business. Think about it. I think you mentioned the word janitorial. So different waste streams that you were looking at. But I'm curious, maybe when it comes to specifically the idea of Godot, if you could give me some perspective, because I feel like it seems like a pretty big transition going from beverage bottling to starting this waste to clean energy company, which is really interesting to me. And I would love to get more details on that.
So yeah, so what got me into this type of waste is that can
Yeah, exactly. I think
yeah,
just because it's like, I think of Godot, at least so far what I've learned, you talk about, getting this organic waste and really it's kind of like a chemical process, right, through which you really manipulate it and then get these byproducts. I'm curious, maybe, how did you really encounter that idea and decide, hey, this is something that I want to, pursue as a business?
Yeah, what got me into it is again kind of a series of fortunate and unfortunate events. I was invited in 2022 to make a presentation about the data set necessary to automate the global supply chain. And I caught the attention of an oil and plastics executive. And he asked me to sit down and uh, to join me in breakfast, and I said sure, but I'm gonna make fun of you first. Why don't you recycle plastic? Pepsi and Coke can't buy enough recycled plastic. And he responded, well, it's a feedstock problem. And so for me, I had to ask the next question is, what is your feedstock? And his feedstock was low density and high density polyethylene. And so I was able to translate that into human terms of stretch film and garbage bags, because when I sell my stretch film and garbage bags on my beverage trucks, I see low density and high density polyethylene. So I knew where they were going. And so in that conversation, I drew up a solution on a napkin. And that solution was basically, how do we leverage the backhaul capacity of beverage trucks to collect said feedstock? What got me kind of into the gear churning was just him saying, huh, that might work. And then me going into stealth mode and saying, okay, how big of a market is this? And then I found out that for Pepsi and Coke to reach their sustainability goals by 2030, it was $14 billion of RPET. And that was enough of a nugget for me to start to deep dive. And it first came, I first put together a presentation around essentially collecting plastics to become plastic again. But as I dived deeper and was able to get the benefit of research teams, adoption manager, and key contacts at the energy majors, I was able to see that was not the best use case and not the best opportunity for me. It was actually when I went across the street from my franchise and went to an apple packer and asked them how much waste do they have? Do you mind sharing some of your waste stream so that I can have a bigger pile? And they were like, well, we have more than you think. And that turned into 55 tons a day, which then made me completely change my business model to say, hey, let's do on-site waste processing. And then I have a different technology than the originally presented technology to me that can process a much more diverse feedstock, but also have a lot more optionality on the back end of what you use it for. Because I realized a big opportunity that everybody was missing was they're trying to solve individual problems like a math equation versus trying to create a multiplication solution. And for me, I wanted to have low input sensitivity and high output optionality so I can copy and paste and build up a network that produces the fuel and the fizz for the beverage industry, because no matter where you are on the planet, you can buy a Pepsi or a Coke. And so therefore, that is the kind of industry that I know very well and that I kind of designed my solution around.
Yeah, hey, I like that. I think that gives me some better perspective into, not only say the operations, but also the, sustainability element of things. I can see where you get this kind of serendipitous encounter from. And that's actually really inspiring. I hope in the future, I'm sure this growing industry, but also, it seems like you've tapped into something niche, right? In that, this is something that maybe has gone under people's noses when it comes specifically to the waste processing. Certainly, you've had that experience in the family background with the bottling, but I think this is, like you said, just right across the street. That's actually, I feel like there's a kind of convenience factor that also I think aids the trajectory of this. Maybe what I'll ask is, when it comes to what Godot actually does, we touched on it a bit with the waste collection and the conversion of that to energy, but I'm wondering if you could explain to me, I still am completely new to this, give us some perspective into, how it is that Godot really operates when it comes to collecting the waste and turning that into energy.
Yeah, so you're basically asking what is the process that we are going to implement when we have capital and are able to scale. Well, that practice starts with a very simple thing. We are going to get a large amount of waste stream, hopefully biogenic. And this is things like apples, trees, things that are kind of nature based, right? Agricultural and biomass. And we put into this pressure vessel, which is a fancy word for saying pressure cooker. And then we blast it with hot water that creates a slurry. After that slurry comes out of the machine, we extract water using a vacuum press so that you have two products at the end from that process. One is a solid fuel that is going to be similar and interoperable to anthracite coal, but it won't have any of the sulfur or heavy metals. And on the other side, we'll have water. And so now we have two sellable items. But the beauty of what we're doing is we can take it the next step, because now we don't just have a solid fuel, but we can then gasify that into food grade CO2 and hydrogen. So as I grew up in the beverage industry, I know that the beverage industry represents about 10% of the food grade CO2 distributed locally. So therefore, that's exactly who I'm going to target. I can provide them with the food grade CO2 that they need, sell it locally, eliminate transportation costs. On the other side, I have this beautiful opportunity with the hydrogen, as we have a large amount of fleets that need to convert out of diesel to either a diesel hydrogen blend or to run exclusively on hydrogen. And we can work with those two kind of pathways so that we can create that fuel and fizz for an industry that I know like the back of.
Wow. Hey, I really like that. It seems like not only are you actually providing people a service, you're also saving them money, which is, interesting to wrap my head around. I'm curious, it seems like you've identified a couple of potential clients, or I guess different use cases, right? For the kind of byproduct that, you're getting when you're taking waste from these big processing facilities, and then you're really, say, using, I think you may have mentioned, taking the trucks and shifting that waste, I would say home, but I guess it goes back to another plant,
Yeah.
which has bigger another.
Yeah, so I think some of the use cases is really focusing on what are the outputs, right? The outputs right off the bat are water and a solid fuel, okay? And with water, we can use that for a huge range of things. One of them includes data center cooling. Another one could be orchard operations. If you're a fruit packer, you need to move your fruit through your system, you're using water. In many cases, you're paying for water to be pulled from the system and then water reintroduced. We can filter it and bring it back right off the bat. So that allows them to kind of reduce their total water usage right at their production facility. We can use it as backup power for backup cooling for data centers, and then we can also use the fuel as backup power. But as a beverage manufacturer and distributor, I also think that we could probably create a distributed network of water production so that we're spending less money on the transportation of water and more on the locally sourcing water, and so we can reduce the aggregate carbon footprint.
Yeah,
So
one
that
of the ideas. Sorry.
yeah, and then the next step is when we get to the gasification side. When you gasify it, you're going to have a variety of products. So first is you're gasifying the solid fuel. You create a syngas where you're going to extract the hydrogen. So now you have hydrogen. But on the other side of the ledger, you actually have food grade CO2 and you have some nitrogen. And then what remains is carbon ash. And all of those products could be sold. So nitrogen is used as in fertilizer, and then in other cases, the carbon ash can be used as a basis for graphene or graphite and other things that are key for battery making. It's a kind of a beautiful process where every single emission can be covered and resold. And one of the things that I realized was right sizing it so that we're doing it at the correct scale so that every product that we produce as an emission or an output is at enough volume to be sellable.
Yeah, I feel like the way that I imagine it is kind of if like you have a plate of leftover food. What you're doing is you're actually, kind of dissecting each of those leftovers and kind of turning it into new food. That's just funny for me to think about.
Well, exactly. And if you think about what is food, it tends to be a combination of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And when you think about carbohydrates, that's just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So what we're doing is we're just taking the base elements of what makes things yummy and turns them into yummy for whatever ecosystem we're feeding.
You're making me hungry. Hey, one thing that I was curious about, I think you mentioned, was really this network of, I think, contributors to, you could call it this like circular process that you're leveraging, right? When it comes to getting the waste and you're turning it into energy. I was curious, maybe in terms of the scale of that network, maybe kind of two sides to it. Number one is, how big do you want this network to be? Just say, it could be, you could give me whatever timeline. What's the vision for the network? And then number two, where do we start? I think Godot, you mentioned, is really capitalizing on these large, waste and kind of food processing plants. But, maybe for context, if we could get some perspective into, kind of where that starts, is it like the Midwest? I think that would be really interesting to talk about is kind of what's the vision as the big picture, and then also where do we start?
Yeah, so let's. I think it's easier to start at the big vision and work backwards from there. So my big vision is thinking about creating a distributed network that is on site of all of the major food and beverage producers, and we collect their waste and convert it to value. Okay, and then that way we have a distributed network all across the globe that is producing hydrogen and food grade CO everywhere. I have small ambitions. It's just that my small ambitions are to be the let's say, the freshest food grade CO2 for every beverage everywhere. Growing up as a as a next generation bottler in the Pepsi network, I always looked at big scale and I always focused on these like massive marketing campaigns, choice of the next generation, the Pepsi generation, all of these things that really were big. They tried to sell to everybody. And that's what I really kind of grew up looking at. And so for me, I start at the biggest level and saying, if I can create the fuel and fizz for the global beverage industry, that is my goal. Everything we work towards that. Right? That is our Mars for Elon, right? But you do need to have this aspirational big vision for other people to get on board, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that people are operating kind of with the same decision-making process and and try to build to your vision. The part that I'm reaching out kind of on the next side is thinking about, okay, where do we start? We start where we know we have piles that are ready to be processed, and we know that we can put together both a pile of waste as well as an off-taker for that waste. So in Central Washington, where I am the Pepsi bottler, and also GODOT, I can create kind of a two-sided marketplace where we can source the feedstock locally, and I can sell the offtake locally as well. And I can do the same in places like Texas and California, where we're talking to off takers as well. The demand is really hard when you're dealing with something like hydrogen, because that is just a starting market. But the food grade CO2 market is well established, and I can find a buyer everywhere.
Yeah, I love that. Because I feel like for me, actually, I resonate a lot with that big vision of being able to really facilitate this circular economy, right? As a lot of people say. I think Godot, at least from what I've seen, just because it leverages such universal products, you have a lot of opportunity to really scale globally. And, certainly kind of we have that home base advantage here in the places where we already have, say, that supply chain network, which I think, it just contributes more and more to its promise. I think one thing that, maybe we can almost investigate a little more too is, how does it work? Say with individual, are we calling them vendors or clients when it comes to, say, these large waste processing facilities, right, who produce a lot of waste, right, and then other stuff as well. Where did they start in this process too? Because I feel like, at least myself, I'm not that familiar with, I guess, production in general. But I'm curious, is it a difficult transition for, say, or a complicated one for some of these waste processing facilities to, kind of leverage Godot's solutions? Or would you say it's a relatively smooth one? I'm maybe curious about kind of how would that process work from kind of the other perspective, where it's like, I'm a producer of, say, apples, right? I make a lot of apples. How do I really work with Godot? How do I facilitate that the relationship?
Yeah, so I think the first thought is you need to make it easy for your customers, whoever your customers may be, whether you consider them a vendor, a feedstock provider, they are inherently your customer. The way that we do it is we make it very seamless. We say, hey, do you have space on site for me to build out? If so, how much is that going to cost me for rent? That's it. We just ask to build on site, and we create a ground lease agreement with them, and then we just start to take in their waste. I want them to drive their forklifts into our building and hand it off. I do not want them to have to load a truck and then send that truck out. So right now, their current process is much more hands-on, requires a lot more touching, and it is very manual, and it is expensive. They are paying to get rid of their waste. They are paying to have somebody show up and recycle for them. Why? We could pay them rent, and we can take their waste streams right off the bat. And that gives us a huge opportunity because we're essentially not paying any transportation fees, which is the biggest problem in the waste to energy space, in the waste to value space, is transportation. So by systematically eliminating transportation and just processing on site, we are able to kind of create a comprehensively cheaper way for them to go about business. And we're doing it in a way that blends exactly with their current operations rather than having them try to retrofit and change everything to adhere to our needs. No, this is about us developing together. And then when we produce our outputs, we will be able to distribute those outputs in the same way that those outputs are currently bought. So if it's hydrogen from fueling, we will find a gas station and charge it there. Or if it's CO2, we'll go straight to your facility and fill your CO2 container outside.
I like I like, like you said, you got to make it easy, I think, for the customers, which is one thing that, if I were on that end, I would most certainly appreciate. I also noticed, I think you talked about being able to really simplify that whole process of the supply chain because like you mentioned earlier, it does take money and effort, right, for these facilities to send out trucks full of the waste, and I guess, find alternative means of disposing of that. But another thing you also mentioned that's, kind of interrelated is the idea of the outputs too, right? You could be creating hydrogen, right, and leverage that hydrogen actually to help facilitate the exchange of waste, right? The energy that's needed to power this new method of handling waste. I'm curious when it comes specifically to that kind of technology that you're introducing to this space. Where do you see the opportunities when it comes to almost being able to create this self-sufficient system of waste disposal, really waste to energy, right? Where you're turning the waste to energy and you have the energy really working for you again to facilitate more.
Yeah, I think where I see it as a very simple thing of what do you need as a company to get your truck from point A to point B. And what we could do is we can just quite simply say, hey, you need hydrogen. Or if you're doing a hydrogen diesel blend, we can do some of the hydrogen and we can support you in retrofitting your trucks. I think the key kind of solution to making sure that your outputs all have homes is first to figure out what is locally needed and not just now, but the next 5 years. So in central Washington, for example, we know sustainable aviation fuel will be built. We also know that what they need for sustainable aviation fuel is hydrogen. That means that there is a market that will come live in our territory that is right now unsatisfied. We also know that there will be battery makers that are needing carbon ash. Well, we can build those relationships so that we can send them the carbon ash that we generate through the gasification process. It's all about making sure you're putting your company in the right position and building outputs for local current demand and growing demand. Our goal is to make sure that we get in every land that we're building is we either have an off-taker for 100% of our waste or we know that certain things will come live that will get us there.
Yeah, no, that's something that I'm personally fascinated by. And I find that, specifically when it comes to being able to almost kind of, you're really creating the solution to a lot of different problems, a lot of different issues, or really being able to address different opportunities, right, for improvement in the whole system, making it not only, say, more efficient, right, but also cleaner, right? When you talk about the environmental perspective, you talk about even the financial perspective too, right? Being able to save people money. I mean, for me, this is really just seeming like a win-win-win all the way. Maybe we can end on this one. The title of this podcast is What Are You Waiting For? What are you waiting for? Whether it's, near term or long term, what are the different opportunities or things that maybe you're on the prowl for, right? When you think about how it is that we can really advance Godot's mission and organization and its impact. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, I think right now it's super simple. We're waiting for capital. But going forward, what we're really waiting for is more and more people eager to take risks. I think that there is a significant lack of courage right now for innovation. And we see this happening all across the globe. As people's fear levels go up, innovation goes down. We need more people to be leaders. We need the people with capital to step into the opportunities rather than step away. So I think what I'm waiting for is kind of more people coming together and building out solutions. There's only so much we can build using Bill Gates' money. And I think what's really sad is to kind of take a look across the network of people out there who speak the correct game but aren't not delivering. Let's figure out how we can motivate people to take the actions that are needed to make this planet a better place and also to solve problems, because truthfully we will make a lot of money solving other people's problems because they see the value in that. And that is really what it comes down. How do we deliver value at scale? We have to wait for the capital, but until then we have to share a story so that more and more people understand. So
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. Not just this podcast, but also I think this is the one small catalyst, one small moment for the larger growth. It's awesome. I'm so glad to have actually, been on the other side this time, interviewing you, being able to hear your perspective as the one who's really kind of the, mastermind behind Godot. This has been amazing. Thank you for this, Andy.
thank you for being a great interviewer, Jayden. I am going to sign off. This is Andy Weinstein, CEO of Godot and founder and host of What Are You Waiting For? So, thank you everybody. Bye.
Thank you.